Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Drupal.org update panel here at DrupalCon Europe 2020. We are very grateful to be here, very grateful to the Kuoni team that we're able to have a conference despite the world situation right now. And we're grateful to have all of you in the audience joining us today. So if you're with us, we like to do a little bit of an informal kind of session when we do these presentations. So feel free to introduce yourself in the discussion chat. I also want to encourage you as we go to feel free to drop questions into the live Q&A tab. We'll try and take those questions. If possible, we'll take them in the appropriate section of the presentation or at the end. We have a relatively short time slot today because we're fitting in between the Dries note and the Q&A. So I'm going to dive right in, and I'll be directing questions to my co-presenters, who I will just a moment. Myself, I'm Tim. I'm Hestenet on Drupal.org. I'm the CTO of the Drupal Association. The top line of faces you see here are the people on the Drupal Association team who work on either connecting with the community about features on Drupal.org or working on the engineering and maintenance of all of the Drupal Association services in general. On the bottom two lines, we have folks who are either key volunteers or part of our infrastructure partnerships. So we'll go through faces here. Neil, would you introduce yourself really quick?
I'm Neil Drum. I am kind of a full stack developer, I guess, and build stuff on Drupal.org, including the merge requests that launched recently.
Ryan, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ryan Aslett, Mixologic on Drupal.org. I am also somewhat full stack. I tend to focus on the parts of the stack that are shaky, that things. No, I do Drupal CI and the packages.drupal.org and the whole composer side of things, and a lot of stats and other sort of Kubernetes stuff in the background. So
Awesome. I'll introduce Brendan, who will hopefully be able to rejoin us. He had a power outage about 2 minutes before the session started. But Brendan is a developer on the Drupal Association Engineering team, and he often works on implementation of community features, things that maybe Rachel has heard from the community that we need and we've developed into an action plan, or things like updates and integrations with, say, the events website. So Rachel, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Rachel Lawson. I'm the community liaison at the Drupal Association. I spend quite a lot of time trying to get to know all of you better. And I can be found as Rachel Norfolk on Drupal.org. And surprisingly, I live in Norfolk in the UK.
Couldn't have guessed. Another face that you may see around the community is Narayan Newton. Narayan works at Tag1 Consulting. He's the CTO there and is also sort of the lead engineer from that team. Tag1 partners with us to help keep the servers up and running here at the Drupal Association. And finally, Michael, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Michael Hess. I've been involved with Drupal infrastructure, I think getting close to 10 years now, which is a long number. I also sit on the security team working group. And so, hi, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you all. Let's dive right in here. So if you had just watched this morning's Dries note, and in particular, our executive director, Heather's portion of the presentation, we talked a little bit about the Drupal Association strategic goals that are coming up for the next period. These goals are not set to just inform our 2021 roadmap, but they're to take us through into 2022 and hopefully 2023 as well. So I'll quickly touch on these because these are going to inform some of the work we've been doing and some of our priorities. In particular, if you have feature requests or thoughts or ideas that relate to these things, we'd like to hear them as well. But obviously, one of the main goals that was just talked about is enabling more contribution throughout the community, both by improving tools and processes and also by improving incentives for organizations to be contributing organizations and making it easier for individuals to get involved. We also want to drive Drupal adoption in general, and that means adoption among multiple audiences. We want end users, of course, to be using Drupal on the web, whether they know it or not, as the website use case. We want end user organizations to be implementing it, whether they're in government, higher ed, any other kind of industry. We want them to be choosing Drupal as a platform. We want the developer community to choose Drupal as something they want to learn and implement for their clients. And we want service providers and agencies to choose Drupal as something that they want to create a business strategy around. Similarly, strategic volunteering is, of course, related to enabling more contribution and also to scaling what we're capable of doing in general. So we want to help engage community volunteers like we always have throughout the history of the Drupal Association and find new ways to use that to multiply what we're capable of doing. And then fostering Drupal talent. We want to recruit new and diverse talent to the community. You can see how these goals are all related to each other. And then last but certainly not least, we need to diversify the funding of the Drupal Association and make sure that we are sustainable and robust. The Drupal Cares campaign was amazing and incredible, but we don't want to have to rely on those sorts of campaigns in order to ensure that the association is healthy and strong. So before we get into things a little bit deeper, I want to share a quick story about professional development. And this is not like directly related to the Drupal Association's work, but rather it's from an insight that I had from a training that we did. I talked about this on Twitter if you saw it, but as someone who works as sort of a technical leader on a Drupal team, I observed recently that when we've been going to virtual professional development trainings or diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings and things like that, I was often one of the only men who showed up to a training, right? I would be there and there'd be like 20 people on screen from all these organizations in these training things, and there'd be like 2 dudes in the whole conversation. And over the course of this year, when I've been doing a lot more virtual professional development, particularly in my role as like a manager and leader of a team, that's been more and more apparent. So I just want to throw out a quick like call to action to specifically the men in the audience, but really to everyone in the audience. There are these resources for professional development, for learning more about diversity, equity, inclusion that you can participate in, and it's kind of on us to do that. People aren't making it hard to find these resources. They're all over the internet. So just to help kickstart that for some folks, one of the most powerful things that I did this year was participate in listening to the Points of Light panel on moving forward, taking action on race and equity. I'll put a link to this recording. It was really powerful. It had Dr. Bernice King, Frederick Riley, Michael Smith all in conversation with each other. I'd encourage you to learn that as maybe a first step if that's something you haven't done before. And there are a lot of other resources as well. So the Drupal Diversity and Inclusion group has put together a resource library that anybody can contribute to. So I've actually put in some resources to that library myself. There are more conversations being hosted by the Points of Light conversation. And the panel I was just referring to that I found so powerful is available for free on YouTube. So you can find the link for the slides, or if you search YouTube for Points of Light, you'll be able to find that. Okay, so that's my mini sort of mission focus, my exhortation to all of us who are doing professional development, and in particular to the missing men that I'm not seeing in some of these training experiences, to kind of get involved. All right, now let's talk about Drupal.org in particular. We want to share some general numbers about statistics about the activity that's happening within the Drupal community that we can see. So this first chart right here that we're using on our title slide is from the Drupal.org/metrics page, which tracks a variety of things that you might find useful. This in particular shows where the conversations or contributions are coming from geographically. So this is where the source of the information that, for example, in the last year, Europe had the highest total number of contributions, North America had the highest per capita, and all the information about growth in other regions. So let's talk a little bit about contributions in 2020. So Neil, you helped me pull some of these numbers. Maybe you can hop in for a second and talk a little bit about some of this contribution data.
Yeah, so yeah, it's just yesterday I pulled a few stats. Merge requests, those launched about a month ago, and some of those were open in our beta period beforehand, but we've seen lots of those been opened up, over 100 since we got the slides drafted for the Dries note. and they've been merged a lot in contrib, and people are opening core merge requests as well.
Awesome. We'll talk a little bit more about merge requests just a little bit later here in this presentation. Drupal 9 readiness is something that I'd like to speak to a little bit. So this is data you might have seen Gabor sharing about the state of the module ecosystem. And we actually implemented some tools on the Drupal CI infrastructure. So Ryan, maybe you can explain how we're figuring out this data and what modules are ready for Drupal 9.
Yeah, basically we have a process that downloads and checks every single Drupal 8 and beyond module in kind of a massively parallel process, and runs a bunch of static analysis tools to figure out whether they have deprecations or whether they have other things, like they're missing its core version requirement to enable it to say, this would otherwise work on Drupal 9, but all it needs is just this one little tweak. And then through a lot of work from Ted Bowman, it does a automated patch submission to these projects to say, hey, all you have to do is commit this patch to your project and it'll make it Drupal 9 ready. So there's a lot of projects out there that have just kind of a patch floating around that could push them over the line. So that's that piece.
Awesome. And then so, just to highlight these numbers, the fact that within 6 months, really, of the Drupal 9 release, 85% of the top 1,000 modules are already available and ported is incredible and unprecedented in the history of the project, which I think speaks a lot to the maturity of the post-Drupal 8 software lifecycle, and then to the sort of tools and support systems that the community's created. So, and I'm sure a lot of you listening are module maintainers yourselves, and thank you for the work that you've done to make your modules compatible, and also hopefully to give them stable releases for the community to use. Finally, I just wanted to share some general stats about activity on Drupal.org at large. I'll go through this super quickly, but to date so far in 2020, so up through December 7th, we've had nearly 10 million unique visitors from our analytics data, about 60,000 issues created, almost 500,000 issue comments. There's a lot of activity and a lot of health on Drupal.org. And these are things that we can dig into and monitor to understand how the community is growing and how many people are coming in to learn about Drupal for the first time. So let's talk about contribution tools a little bit. So the super exciting news to kick off with first is merge requests. So the issue forks and merge request system is something that Neil Drum largely built. I'm going to share some slides that were part of the initiative update and ask Neil to talk about them a little bit more. But if you have more specific questions, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail as well.
Hey, Tim, before you do that, can you tell me what a merge request is?
Sure. So yeah, if you're listening and you're not familiar, if you're used to, right, we're talking about how you actually contribute code to Drupal, right? And Drupal has been on a patch workflow where you're literally making a diff on the command line and uploading a patch file to an issue. And we've been doing that for almost 20 years. The sort of the whole history of the project has been on patches. Merge requests are GitLab's word for pull requests, the same sort of tool that you might have seen if you've ever done anything on GitHub, where you essentially have a fork of a project, you make changes, and you click a button to request that the changes be merged back by the maintainer. So it's a much easier sort of tool to use. So I'll advance here. Neil, why don't you speak to these a little bit, and maybe if you have a little bit more detail perhaps than the regular initiative update, we can go in there. And if folks have questions, please do post them in the Q&A.
Yeah, so the reason we did something a little different with merge requests than you see on GitHub or GitLab.com is that issues on Drupal.org are collaborative. It's pretty normal for a Drupal issue to be resolved by multiple people contributing to the code change or and contributing other stuff surrounding the code. So we wanted to make sure that those everyone can commit to these forks and really enable that collaboration, where on GitHub, the fork is in your namespace. And it's extra work to allow other people in.
And for folks who maybe haven't seen how this works, I'm going to play a short sort of video demo. There's no audio, so Neil can maybe talk over this about kind of how this process works. But if you haven't done the merge request workflow yet, we'll give you a picture of that here.
All right, so we're opening an issue here. Pretty quick.
Double time speed, yep.
Yep. And every issue will have this green button, create issue fork. It will also have a checkbox, create a branch. To work in a branch so that you don't confuse your 9.1x of origin versus 9.1x of your fork. There's a show commands button on the right, which will open up the commands to easily add the Git remotes and get started on the command line. And Gitlab has the web IDE and inline editing as well. So for straightforward changes, like update this README here, the web IDE is a good way to go. And can open a merge request. If you get to this screen, you can ignore everything. We added probably after this video was made, added a open issue fork, open merge request button straight to the issue page. And Drupal CI testing starts for that. Assuming your project has tests. And the real power of GitLab, everything before is just Git. It's pretty normal. Be able to collaborate on and comment on individual lines of code, and that activity makes it back to the issue as well. If you're a maintainer, you'll see a merge button all the way at the bottom of the issue. That will get in the commit message with credit, and yep, there it is. And that
is pretty much the complete workflow. Yeah. Awesome. So again, if you haven't tried this, I think you'll find that it's a really powerful new process. We've gotten tremendously good feedback about it. We also have gotten feedback about a few things that could be improved. So there is a meta issue in the Drupalorg queue for merge requests. We may be able to post that link in chat. And if you encounter anything, you can create a child issue of that. I want to pause for just a quick second to answer one question here. Truls asks, how is contribution different during the COVID period? Has it increased or decreased compared to before? I'll speak to the part of it that I know so far, and perhaps if anyone else has additional thoughts, they can chime in. But if we looked at, say, Dries' who contributes to Drupal post, we did see a sort of increase of, I think it was about 13% in contribution activity year over year. Now that report goes from July to July when that one is pulled. So it was probably skewed pretty heavily by the fact that Drupal 9 was coming out. And it's a little bit hard to disentangle the Drupal 9 release from the COVID release, or from the COVID activity, rather. So my impression is that contribution overall is up, but also that certain kinds of contribution are more difficult. So virtual contribution rooms are sometimes harder for people to get engaged in and feel present in. So it's a mixed story depending on the context of the contribution. All right, we'll keep running here since we've got a little bit of a short period. Something that's coming next, we're looking at how GitLab CI might be adapted into what we're already doing with Drupal CI. I don't think we'll dwell on this too long right here, just that we have a Jenkins dispatcher. We might try and replace that with the GitLab CI system to replace the dispatching process and look into some other features. So Finally, maintaining GitLab has been sort of a new challenge compared to maintaining our own tools. You've probably seen these tweets periodically whenever we're doing an update in the GitLab system. One of the benefits of using a sort of quote off-the-shelf tool is we get the advantage of the feature releases and new updates and new tools that the very well-funded and large GitLab team creates. One of the disadvantages is we're beholden to their update schedule and their release of security updates. So as Neil can tell you, we do a lot of usually Wednesday security releases of the GitLab tools because that's when they pop up on our radar a lot of the time. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about non-PHP tooling, because one of the key elements of the Dries notes today was talking about JavaScript and components of Drupal basically that are not written in PHP. So we are currently evaluating how to do that. So if you saw the information about the decoupled menus initiative, right, that initiative was focused on what seems like a very narrowly scoped feature of JavaScript menus. But this section here at this part of the mountain about testing and documentation and releasing to NPM and security management, those are the pieces that are going to apply to everything beyond just this one component, right? This one component is an example to prove how we should do testing for JavaScript, documentation for JavaScript, the NPM publishing, security management. So that's a lot of stuff that we have to get right, and it's going to be the next phase of a lot of our tooling evolution, is to make sure that we're capable of doing those things. So we are working with the JavaScript Decoupled Menus Initiative team to understand what's still needed, what the requirements are, how to make contribution appealing to non-PHP developers. Here are a few of the things that we know are still needed, but there might be other things we're missing. So if you're in the audience and you are well-versed in JavaScript contribution and things like that, feel free to post to the issue link that I've put there, or reach out to us and let us know what else you're thinking and what we might be looking for. And I apologize if I'm moving quickly. We have only a 40-minute session today. So another feature that we just recently added to go along with the merge requests is for core, there are live deployment previews. So these are using the Tugboat QA system. The Tugboat team, it's a spinoff of the Lullabot organization. And they donated and sponsored having this feature on Drupal.org. What this is you'll see the UI has changed a little bit, I think, since the screenshot, but you'll see a button next to any core merge request that allows you to open up a preview with the merge applied and installed that you can log into and play around with to see whatever the changes are without having to spin up your own local dev environment and apply the merge. So hopefully this will help with reviewing particularly front-end types of changes. It'll hopefully also help folks contribute who maybe don't have a robust development environment on their local machines or are sort of less experienced in core development. They'll still have a way to see what's going on in core and maybe provide feedback on those changes. So we're pretty happy about that. I also want to talk about community features, and I'm going to talk to Rachel and Brendan on our team about this a little bit here. There's a lot of things that we do on the Drupal Association team that come out of requests from the community. And this will actually, in part, address one of the questions in our Q&A, I think. So let's first talk about the community events feature. So Rachel, first, can you explain what this is and why we did it? Mute. Rachel, I think you're still muted.
No, I'm not.
There we go.
Now you're okay.
Yeah?
Yep, we can hear you.
Right. Okay. So I think first I'll start with the fact that why we've done things the way we've done it. We wanted to capture the about important things that happen in the community right as data in the middle of Drupal.org. Mainly because then in the future, we can go do exciting things with the data. So we were approached by the new event organizers working group saying, we really should have a definitive list of events and capture loads of information about them. Things like who's sponsoring, who's speaking, and so on. So we worked with the event organizers working group to create a specification for what that might look like for a first iteration. And what you can see at /community/events is the very first iteration of an events listing. Anybody who wants to host an event can post it here. You need to get a little bit of permission first. There's a place where you can click that says, how do I add events? And one of the administrators for that area will just add you so that you can put information in. And then you can post as many events as you want, and you'll see things there. I can see one for the community working group. I can see something for New York, and so on in this list, and San Francisco there as well. So things are coming in. We are getting useful information, which we can share with the event organizers working group around who are the regular speakers, who are the regular sponsors, who are in the future we'll be able to do the code of conduct contacts, which are really important, who's organizing, and that way we can communicate with these people on a more effective basis because we know who they are, and provide better service.
Yeah. And I think that's...
Future? Do you want to talk about the future?
Yeah, well, I think we should, and in particular about that sort of knowing what's going on. So why don't you talk a little bit about the vision for the future, and then Brendan, why don't you jump in and talk about some of the implementation and how it relates to groups. So go ahead first, Rachel.
So in the future, we want to be able to store even more information and provide it to other people who can do interesting things with it. So you may remember Drupalcal, which exists, and they're bringing out a new version of Drupalcal at the moment, which will look straight at /community/events for information about events. So they will automatically appear in one place and in Drupalcal as well, which really helps. We want to get to the position where you'll be able to see if an event has fully trained code of conduct contacts on it and things like that. We'll be adding that type of functionality. We'll be able for event organizers post-event to be able to add to their event listing and kind of in the background information like how many people came, what sponsorship opportunities they received, what kind of feedback received on their camp. The idea being that once we get lots of iterations of that, we'll be able to see and provide best practice knowledge to camps in the future.
Awesome. So I mean, I think that's a big part of that vision. And it, of course, is closely related to what the original purpose and the evolved purpose of groups.drupal.org was over the years. And as some people know, that's our last Drupal 6 site that is really, we're working to eliminate in favor of bringing functionality into Drupal.org itself, starting with this community events thing. So Brendan, can you talk a little bit about some of the work you've done so far implementing this and some of what's coming up?
Yeah, the community events view itself as it stands right now is a pretty basic implementation. You know, it's a content type with some fields and a view, and a content type with some fields and a view does not groups make. So you know, going forward, I'm sure we're going to be trying to expand this basically this whole section to reflect more of the functionality of groups, doing it in a way that kind of lets us drop Drupal 6 off our maintenance window, and hopefully in a way that lets us bring this all forward when we make the jump to 9, whenever that winds up happening. There's a lot of things groups does. I think it would be good for us to figure out and prioritize the stuff that is most important, so we can work on that first. Obviously, the events feature that's on the site right now, as Rachel made very clear, is a first iteration. So I would love to do some work there as well to clean it up and make it more useful. And recently, Drupalcal dropped us a little note that was like, hey, you know, putting versioning data in the API would be helpful. So, you know, things like that, so they can easily tell when something's been updated or changed. probably next on the list. We'd hoped that there would be a little more iteration on this more quickly, but COVID and switching to virtual events and needing to integrate a lot of different things kind of pulled my attention away from developing that feature into doing things like syncing the Quony schedule down into the event site, so that we didn't need to rely on their tooling and updates and all of that, which frankly not a perfect integration, but it's something I've been working on, and I think it mostly worked, so that's great.
One thing I would add as well is we're already starting to experiment with moving non-event centric information. So for example, there was the Drupal core group, which was less like the end user facing, here's a core release information, and more the core coordination group. And we have moved that into the sort of strategic initiative section on Drupal.org. So they have a separate blog post that's better integrated and can be easily cross-posted to the main Drupal news. And that has links to the strategic initiative landing pages that we're talking there. Let's see, one quick question that I'll answer here from Miro, like how can the community participate in adding sort of features to D2O, specifically things like the event listing, some limitations about whether you can use new modules and things like that. Yeah, it's tricky and it's hard to go over the whole scope of this. I think, Neil, you generally have some thoughts.
Yeah, briefly, we want to future-proof things, make things maintainable. So new module right now, a basic rule we would have is absolutely nothing that doesn't have a Drupal 9 equivalent and things like that. Custom code, it's stuff we have to maintain going forward. So we want what we need. We want to keep it straightforward and not too much extra or nothing extra.
Truls, you asked another question about how will it help with the back end? Will there be user access? I'm not sure if I think you were referring
to Tugboat.
Okay. Go ahead, Neil.
Well, we can ask them about back-end access, but I don't think there's anything like SSHing into those machines, those previews. Yeah,
they're more deployment previews than they are full development environments, but we can certainly check with that team and see what features might be coming. Okay, I'm going to keep running here with some of those questions. I'll skim through this. There's some other things going on related to community contribution. Rachel can speak to this just a little bit, but you may have seen that we've added a contributor guide that's focused on these different areas. So Rachel, as I just step through these slides fairly quickly, why don't you give a quick update on this stuff as well, and how people can get involved in the contributor guide?
Yeah, so the contributor guide, another example of trying to break down what we have as loads of content into actual data. So we're trying to break down what we store about the jobs that we do that make the community work, the roles that people fill, the tasks that people complete in those roles, and the skills that they may need or learn while they're performing that role. So we're in a very long job now of converting from documentation in lots of different places spread right across Drupal.org and several other places too, into those roles, into lists of tasks that are attached to the roles, and so on. So I would have a role as a core mentoring coordinator. So I should have a role defined in that section that talks about what my role entails. It should have a whole bunch of tasks that I perform in that role, and so on. Now, we're in the process of building that, and we have meetings in the documentation Slack channel on a regular basis on Tuesdays, every other Tuesday, about documentation all over, but we include the contribution guide. Jennifer Hodgson has been a how should we say, an incredible force in moving that forwards. And I've seen quite a few other people getting involved as well. what we will be looking to do next is try to improve the user experience of being able to search those roles and tasks and find the thing that you want. The eventual goal is to get to a point where people can find out quickly ways that they can get involved in the community. So they'll be able to turn around and say, hey, I've got this bunch of skills, which they can choose from a list. What can I be doing? How can I actually find something that's of interest to me? And hopefully when we've got the searching right and all the data in there, you'll be able to do exactly that. Not only that, but we will eventually be able to get to a point where we can allow people to associate their Drupal.org account with the long-term and short-term roles that they participate as. So in my role, I could associate my user account with core contributing coordinator, and I would be able to see in one place all the tasks that I regularly do. Yeah. Right in my user profile, which means that I've got less problems having to remember where exactly that exists within all of the documentation that we maintain. Also, it allows us to celebrate the fact that people are fulfilling these roles, because we'll be able to highlight them and mark them on people's Drupal.org profile and say, hey, this person, JSXJM, is involved in this long list of roles that they get involved in all the time. And we're very lucky for their input. We'd be able to see that Michael Hess, wherever he's gone, is involved in all these things related to security and many other things as well. And we'll be able to all go, actually, yeah, this is pretty incredible. All these people doing these things.
Yeah, it's exciting because it takes what was hidden in random Slack channels and documentation pages and makes a formal process out of it. So I think it's really key. We are so low on time. I'm going to do my best here. Ryan, let me have you talk about Composer a little bit. Some of this is a recap of the slides from the initiative keynote. So I'll sort of step through and let you hit some of the high points about this and about kind of what this means and what people should be thinking about.
All right. Composer 2 came out on October 28th. And next. It is fast and it is efficient. Before it used up a ton of memory. It was not something that you could ever use in a production environment. Now it is crazy less amount of memory. Like we can actually possibly run Composer in a 64 megabyte or 128 megabyte droplet, something small in production, which means it can be used for something like auto updates or even the update manager, which I'll get to in a sec. It's also, next, a lot faster. Requiring a few modules used to take somewhere upwards in the neighborhood of like 5 minutes. Now it is really fast and really great to use. Yeah, I would say do what you can to upgrade to Composer 2. In the process of building out all of the stuff that we had to do to support it, we ended up with a lot more data in the Drupal.org database that allows us to report on stuff about the modules, report on what calculated dependencies we're putting out there. So this, the little red box is a little bit off here, but the commerce web form path auto you see on there, we may be able to now say, hey, here's what this project actually depends on. Next. So yes, and because it's all now possible, the speed and memory, we may be able to replace the update manager in core so that people who are like, I don't want to use Composer, it would be invisible to them. They would just be able to go and point and click and add extensions to their Drupal site and no longer have to worry about the under the hood implications of Composer. Next. So,
awesome.
To convert your site to Composer 2, there's a docs page on Drupal.org. I would say look for preparing your site for Composer 2. Search for that, and it basically just boils down to plugins. Plugins need to be upgraded. That's the only thing that needs to be changed. So move on.
Yeah, so let's talk about Drupal CI as well. There's been some changes related here, both because of the Composer things and because of some of the Drupal 10 preparations and things like that.
Right. So, oh wow, buttons. Drupal CI, Drupal.org communicates with Jenkins, which goes to Amazon EC2, which then that kicks off the test runner. So what we're changing is we're replacing the way Amazon and Jenkins communicate to all run on Kubernetes. Once we do that, we're going to be able to convert Drupal CI to run entirely in a containerized environment, so it all runs on Kubernetes. And then once we have everything running on Kubernetes, we may be able to shift over to GitLab actually being the thing that's managing Kubernetes, and be able to get rid of Dispatcher and Jenkins entirely. So that's
Awesome.
a lot for that slide, but I don't know
Yeah.
that reflect that. But until that time, we did have a community contributor contact us that was like, "Hey, I figured out how to make it so I could run any container I wanted to in Drupal CI." So we added how to do custom Docker images. So if you're, maybe you're running Search API, or you're running something else that needs, an Elasticsearch container or a Solr container or any other service that you want, this was figured out by a community member, and I didn't know this feature existed in Drupal CI. So it's been a thing we've been wanting to do for a while. So
yeah, so check that out if you ever need something that's not part of the standard Drupal CI environment that you need to try out and test.
Yeah, and you could just skip that.
Okay, cool. So we talked about the Kubernetes conversion that will hopefully be happening shortly here.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, I'm going to talk quickly about Drupal Steward. So you may have seen a blog post that went up recently about the first time that we've activated the Drupal Steward program. And Michael may chime in a little bit about this as well. As a quick sort of overview for those who haven't heard or just need a refresher, the Drupal Steward program is a program to provide a sort of safety window, an extra peace of mind window when an update comes out. It's typically applied for highly critical mass exploitable updates, so that you have extra time to schedule the update, either as an individual or as a team. So if, like most of the attendees here, you're in Europe and that update might happen at a weird hour of the night for you, if you're on Drupal Steward and the PSA that came out says that it's going to be covered, you'll know, hey, you can apply the update the next morning and the vulnerability is mitigated. So we have partners, the platform partners at Acquia and Pantheon helped us found the program and fund the program so we could create a community level. This means that clients of Acquia and Pantheon's hosting platform get protected by this program, and we coordinate with them. And then we're also building a community tier that's available now. We're still building a self-service sign-up page, but you can contact us to get signed up, where you can get protected no matter where your hosting provider is. So I'm actually going to skip through this really quickly, but basically what happens if there's a highly critical vulnerability, the security team identifies it, determines if it can be mitigated using this web application firewall method. They post a PSA that will indicate if it's covered by the program. We communicate that with the partners to implement the protection, make sure that it's not getting false positives by doing it in monitor-only mode, make it an enforcing mode to make sure that that protection is in place for those customers. So that's pretty much how that works. And again, it doesn't apply to every vulnerability. We'll be very clear when it applies. It mostly exists to help protect these highly critical core vulnerability situations, protect sites in the case of the sort of Drupal-geddons of the world.
Nice job.
So, sure. Yeah, I had to sneak that in about a minute and a half. Anything to add, Michael? If you
No,
have any
that
other
was a
thoughts?
great overview. Yeah, if you've got questions, reach out to Tim's calendar, and we can get you signed up now on our community tier, which takes about 30 minutes to an hour of onboarding, depending on your hosting setup and configuration.
Yeah, it's very quick, and we have so far found that we're trying to subsidize this for community level users. It basically works with a globally distributed endpoint of mod security rules. If there is some cost involved, but it should be less than $200 a year for most sort of smaller, medium community sites. So it is usage based, so it'll scale to your needs. I'm going to skim quickly through infrastructure in our final 45 seconds, and I'm sorry if I don't get to more of our questions. I'll capture those questions so that I can reach out and answer some of these later. On the infrastructure side, we work with the partners. I mentioned Tag One Consulting. Narayan is a part of that team and is our infrastructure partner for supporting the servers. Those servers are hosted at the Oregon State University Open Source Lab. So we thank them for their long-term partnership to make this happen. We're doing a few things with our infrastructure recently. We're migrating the file system from NFS to Ceph for how all of the file system management happens for Drupal. This is a big deal and is kind of part of our modernization of the infrastructure that has been a big project for Narayan and Tag One on our behalf. And oh, we're going to lose it. So thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it. We'll have to talk to you again soon. What I will do for this Q&A, like I said, I'll capture these and see if I can ping folks in the Drupal Slack. But I'm afraid the Dries Q&A is just about starting, and I need to head over there. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.